So, back at the reading chair. Um, this is chapter 6, reading from 10 Years of Pain. And let me start with showing you the image of the first installation of the 5 body sculptures under the quintet. This chapter is called The Quintet Experience. I am used to performing on stage, using movement and mime, interacting with the audience, using lots of energy and character work. In all of the 5 body sculptures, I went against all this. Every piece being a static image for 3 hours. There was a great challenge in this new format of performing, and especially because I was doing 3 of the installations for the very first time. Meeting the audience passively was a completely new experience for me and of great value. Number 1. Censurert. Censored. The piece expressed powerlessness due to restrictions applied from others. While in the cast, which completely covered my body, my only communication with the outside world was through my eyes. I had my crew check up on me every 20 minutes, as I did not know how I would react to being restrained for a long time. We agreed on a set of standard questions that they would ask me, such as, "Are you okay? Are you cold? Do you need water? Do you want to stop?" One slow blink of the eyes would be yes, and 2 short would be no. At first, many people did not pay attention to me. They just thought it was a sculpture, until they met my eyes. When they realized there was a person inside, they got quite shocked. Some people talked to me, some asked questions, some just watched, and others talked about me as if I could not hear them. Only one had a long conversation with me. She kept talking about how she experienced my work in different ways, like a mother that wanted to take care of me, like a child, curious, like a spectator, amazed, and like a woman, attracted. She stated her satisfaction of talking to someone that was just listening and not replying. The curiosity and the comments were amusing, but what amused me most was the number of people who flirted with me. Maybe because it was so safe, I could not make a move, literally. One group of women discussed whether I had cheated on the shape of my ass and genitals. Just a few touched me, and one grabbed my penis, trying to arouse me. Being isolated in the middle of a crowd of hundreds of people is difficult to describe. A strange and very interesting experience. Physically, the worst part of being restrained was the cold. I started the performance standing outside by the entrance as Stunt Club opened. Later, I was moved to different places inside the gallery. I was freezing. The plaster cast drew the heat from my body, and at no point did I feel the temperature was comfortable. After some time, I lost the feeling in my feet, my hands followed, and by the end of the 3 hours, all my limbs were stiff and numb. It was tiring to stand upright for so long, and both my lower back and neck were aching after about 1 hour. My only possible movement was that I could vaguely stretch my back, and to an extent, I could shift the weight on the soles of my feet. After passing the second hour, I tried to fall asleep. I managed to reach the point of almost slipping into dreamland, but the fact that I felt like falling scared me from going any further. My crew were equipped with special scissors and other tools to cut me out, but when I reached my goal of 3 hours, I could not resist breaking free using muscle power. I imagined that breaking out of the cast would be how it feels to hatch from an egg. Liberating. And here's another image of censored. Number 2, sting. Stitches. One stitch after the other, frequent reminders that someone else is really in charge of what you are allowed to do. There are not many people that I was prepared to ask to stitch me up. At the top of the list was Hilde Rønning, a seamstress who works with leather and who has made most of Pain Solution costumes for the past few years. As she had never stitched living flesh before, she wanted to try it first. Both understandable and useful. She did not know how she would react when she stitched me. And I was not quite sure how I would position my hands and arms. I also needed a photo for the program, and it was good to get some notion of how being stitched would actually feel. The night we tried it at my home, my youngest son Kim and his friend Benjamin on the night that we tried this out at my home, my youngest son Kim had his friend Benjamin for a sleepover. After my hand was stitched to my face, the kids called me and I went to their room to see to them. I will never forget the look on Benjamin's face when he saw me. My kids may be used to seeing me do some homework, but I'm sure Benjamin had never seen anything like that before. I explained to them why I was stitched, tucked them in with the hand that was still free, and they fell asleep. So to elaborate, I had one hand stitched to my face. Hilde coped with the task just fine. She was amazed by how it actually was to sew living flesh, and had to get used to having the material she worked with bleeding. She worked hard to get me ready by the time the exhibition opened, and the result was great. The sensation of the needle, we used medical sutures, going through my flesh repeatedly was not too bad. Some spots, like parts of my face, close to the armpit and around my crotch, genital area, were more sensitive. And here is an image from the exhibition. Yeah, and here's another more detail. Hand stitched to the face, arms to the body, the other hand covering my genitals. And then my back was soon stitched onto the back of the chair. The feeling of being restricted by the thread holding my hands and arms in their fixed positions was new and interesting. It did not hurt, but if I tried to move, the threads tightened and that stung. On the same night, other installations took place in the same room. A group of men and women, calling themselves the Kalashnikov Knitting Club, sat around the table knitting and chatting, while on the table there was a pile of firearms. As I sat there on my chair watching them, I recognized several of them. I could see them looking briefly in my direction, but I could never meet their eyes and give them a little blink or nod to say hi. Later, some of them told me that they for quite a while had failed to realize it was me. They thought it was a statue. This time there were not so many spectators as this time there was not as many spectators as there had been on the opening night, and the atmosphere was very different. Those who did come were stunned by the image and kept looking at me in silence, with a kind of sad expression on their faces. A journalist and a photographer from VG, Norway's leading tabloid paper, had turned up. They took pictures and made some notes, asked my assistants for information and left. Later they returned. Their editor had sent them back to wait until the end of the performance so they could interview me. This time an art critic from the same paper accompanied them. The 3 hours seemed somewhat longer this time, and once again it was my lower back and my neck that suffered the most strain. I did change my position from time to time, despite the fact this tightened the treads, in order to give me some relief on my back. I was unable to do much about my neck, as my hand was stuck to my face and my arm to my body, so there was only room for minimal adjustments. At the end of the 3 hours, I stretched further and reached for the limits of movement. I even considered trying to break free, as I had done the week before, but the sutures we used were strong, and so is living flesh. I think if I really had to break free, I could have done it. However, Kate Pendry, my curator and assistant, stood ready with the scissors, counting down the last minutes. There was no reason to push it any further. Having the stitches cut was a wonderful relief. Stretching out and turning my head felt so good. The next day I was surprised to find my picture dominating VG's front page, with the headline, "Stitched his hand to his face and called it art." I had a good laugh and wondered if nothing more important had happened in the world. For me, it was great publicity. Now the whole country could see my work, and people did talk about it for weeks. Other newspapers picked up on it, and the big question was, is this art? I was accused of being speculative and nothing different from people locked up in mental institutions. That my work was without any meaning and that I just did it to get on the news. None of them had bothered to ask me anything. They just based their opinion on the exaggerated coverage in VG. I felt I should reply to the accusations and considered writing to the papers. But I did not have to. I received a phone call from NRK, the national TV channel, and was invited to meet one of the journalists in a live debate. This and all the radio interviews that followed gave me even more publicity, and I still had 3 more body sculptures to present at the stunt club. There's another close-up. Just a reminder, all these pictures, all these photographs are from my sister, Helene Fjell, which has also been the photographer that I have collaborated with on the other books that we have published. Okay, Pointed Experience continues. Number 3, Tornerose, Sleeping Beauty. On a bed of sharp edges, under the weight of broken glass, the tiniest movement will cause the risk of further pain. Picture time again. So here I am in a glass coffin, buried almost completely in broken glass. Some time back, in the early 90s, I saw a picture of a man buried in glass. It was a German fakir trying to set a world record. At that time, I seriously considered to try to break that record, but I never got around to even trying it. While creating Quintet, I felt the image of a naked body buried in broken glass, lying in a glass coffin, would fit perfectly into the concept. I wanted to create a beautiful image to contrast the hardness and danger posed by the sharp edges of the shattered glass. During the preparations for Quintet, I had called several of the musicians I know and asked them to compose a version of the children's song about Sleeping Beauty. So on and so forth. The result was 7 different tracks following the same theme. In the gallery space where the exhibition took place, there was a small cube, a white cube. I covered the interior with black cloth and had a bright red velvet tissue draped from the ceiling coming down behind the glass coffin. In fact, the coffin was an aquarium, which I had traded for a case of beer. I've used broken glass in scenography on several occasions over the years. Therefore, I had a reasonable amount in stock. However, I realized it was not sufficient. But thanks to Archimboldo, the restaurant located in Kunstnernes Hus, I had access to large amount of empty wine bottles. They even let me use their dishwasher to wash off the labels. I had several cases of bottles prepared beforehand, but on the day of the performance, when I had broken them all, I could easily see there was still not enough. Time was running out. There was only a few hours to the opening, and I had to wash bottles in the kitchen before breaking them with a hammer inside the gallery. I worked like a lunatic. The shattered splinters flew around me as I pounded the bottles with a hammer. This is probably the riskiest thing I have ever done. There was no time for safety. I did not wear gloves or goggles, and I could feel the splinters showering my face. Fortunately, the only cut I got was a tiny one on my left index finger. I had planned to pierce just that finger to have a drop of blood on it for the installation. So that worked out well. Just in time, we managed to fill the coffin with the smaller bits of glass, put me in and cover me with the larger pieces. And as the exhibition opened, I lay there, buried, holding a rose. Only 1 or 2 people were admitted to my crypt at the time, and I kept my eyes shut as if I was asleep. The atmosphere was amazing. The solo spectators were silent, and those who came in pairs just whispered. I could smell them, I could hear them and sense them. A very special way to meet the audience. The music, running in loops, was only accompanied by the distinctive sound of the glass, as the movement caused by my breathing made the pieces scrape slightly against each other. A very tiny and sparkling sound. I did not expect being buried in glass to be as hard a task as it turned out to be. The first 30 to 40 minutes were quite comfortable, but then I began to feel odd pieces pressing against particular nerves. Some pieces pressed against spots in my upper back, shoulders, arms and leg. The worst was a piece that hit a spot in my hip and caused a jolt of pain running down my left leg, all the way to the toes. Anyone who has had a slipped disc would know that feeling. There was no way I could shift the weight to get off these spots. No possibility to make the tiniest movement without having the glass slide off my body. After about an hour, the edge of the aquarium caused so much pain to my neck that I had to ask one of my assistants to find some padding. I can say without any doubt that this was the most painful of the 5 body sculptures in Quintet. Actually, it was probably the most painful performance I have ever done. In order to complete the 3 hours, I had to mobilize all my willpower and struggle to keep my focus. During the last 1.5 hours, I could not resist smoking a cigarette and stretching my neck every 20 minutes. To conclude, there's a little tale to tell. There's a little tale about the end of Tornerosa. Upon reaching the last 15 minutes, one of the organizers from Stunt Club, Martin, came in and said there was a princess at the exhibition who asked permission to kiss me awake when the time was up. It was the perfect way to end the performance. She came in and kissed me gently on the lips. I opened my eyes slowly, looked at her, and reached my arm out to give her the rose. Then, very slowly, I stood up. The glass made a wonderful noise as it poured off me, and with some effort I managed to get out of the coffin. My limbs were stiff and numb, and my body was covered with red marks from the glass, but there were no cuts. Then I embraced the princess and gave her a proper kiss. Gonna show 2 more pictures of this installation, and then I think we will call this chapter. And I'll be back with the second part of the Quintet experience in the next chapter.